Hey guys, this is the second half of 6.4 step 1. There are two questions left in your Cornell notes to answer, and one is about SCSI and the other is some tips for color marking. And so for the first question about SCSI, we're focusing just on the literal understanding first when we first approach a text. So we're just focusing on the first three letters: S for setting, C for characters, and A for action. So let's take a look. What have we got here? If we look first at setting in this piece, we know that we're in Greece in April. The narrator has recently moved into an old fisherman's house in the extreme north of the island. It's secluded on a rocky promontory. A promontory is like a cliff that overhangs water. The room he is in is overhung with cypress and olive trees. So I highlighted some of those key things from that first paragraph to show how I came to that understanding. Then if we look at the second paragraph, we see that they're dependent on a boat to bring them provisions. And so this is an aspect of the setting because they're so remote and secluded that they have to get their stuff from a boat that arrives by water. If we take a look at the third paragraph, this is kind of an interesting paragraph. It's talking about an island named Vigla that's harsh and cold. And it's a little bit different, I think, than the other paragraphs. The last paragraph comes back to this fisherman's house, and it's described as quiet, secluded, neglected, cold, rocky, with plants growing in the cracks. Okay, so let's take a look at character now. What characters do we have in this text, and what do we know about them? Well, first of all, we're told that this is a nonfiction work by Lawrence Durrell. And then we have the pronouns we and I. So we know that the I, the speaker, is Lawrence Durrell because it's nonfiction, meaning it's true, right? And he's talking about himself. So that is Lawrence Durrell. And just that you can determine that is going to show a lot about what you understand from these keys in literature. And you do understand this stuff. So just use those pieces of knowledge, put them together now, and remind yourself what nonfiction is. Nonfiction is true. It's like Jesmyn Ward's Men We Reaped. It is not made up, right? It's not fiction. It's not a novel. It's not a story. In this case, what we've got here is probably a travel log, and that's information is never given to us in the extract. But if you can figure that out from reading it, you'll show an even better understanding of the text. But maybe you're not real familiar with travelogues, but you can at least deduce that it is true and that the I is the same as the speaker since it's nonfiction. Okay, we know also that from the first paragraph that he is a writer. And so then we can presume next that this text we're reading is what he is writing when he is in this temporary home in Greece. From the second paragraph, we see some other characters. A boat crew is described. These are like rustic workers, cold in the elements. In the third paragraph, we see a you is referenced. He's speaking directly to the audience here, and the you is someone who may sometime travel to Greece or the Mediterranean and explore this place. Finally, in the last paragraph, we have a couple of names, the initial N standing for a name beginning with N, and Theodore, and then the we pronoun again. So we know that Durrell is with N and Theodore in Greece, and that's the we he's been talking about. Now, maybe there are additional people we don't know, but there are at least those three. We once again have the you referenced. But here in the very last lines, we have some really important information about who these people are. We know that they've come from England to Greece, and they don't have much company otherwise. They're very secluded. They are friends, and they're living a narrow style of loving. I love that phrase. And the last thing we can glean from this text is that Durrell is trying to write a book from this trip in Greece and where he's staying. Okay, so those are all literal things. Those are not debatable. Those are tough to find, though. It's not obvious just with the first reading. You have to dig a little to find that stuff. And so take your time as you're first encountering the text. Make sure you have a good literal understanding. You're going to use all of your time working on all of this stuff. Oh, we forgot action, didn't we? Okay, what is happening? In the first paragraph, Durrell and his friends take an old fisherman's house as theirs, so that must mean they're renting it, right? He sits in the room and writes what we read. The second paragraph, one day books arrive by water in confusion and loud diesel engine sounds. The boat staggers off, which is an interesting personification, right? But the boat leaves, and then he imagines what the crew will do. They'll eat a lot, gorge themselves on melons, and fall asleep in a pile like cats. And they depend on this boat every week for their food and whatever they need, their provisions. The next paragraph is really a directive to the reader. Climb to Vigla in the time of cherries and look down. That is a directive. It's a command. That's the kind of sentence that it is. And so the narrator, Durrell, is telling the audience, come here and here is what you will see. The other action that takes place in this very descriptive paragraph is really about the water. The sea that is sucked harshly between the rocks, and the water races into this swimming pool, and the north wind curdles it. So there's some action, but it's really mostly about description and, describing this place. In the last paragraph, he revisits the day they found the house, right? It was on a ringing spring day that we discovered the house. They came down a stone ladder. N says to Theodore, the quietness alone makes it another country. They looked through the branches and the growth and to see inside. And they look around outside and they notice, all of these different details. They shiver, so it's cold. They look down at their faces, the reflection in the sea. And then there's this last sort of general statement about what they're doing now. They're living this narrow style of loving, and he has this endeavor to write a book about it. Okay, now we're done with our literal understanding. So the next thing is to really focus on the guiding question to help us with the second S in SCASI. The second S stands for style. And the guiding question will ask you a question about style. It will also probably hint at the I in SCASI, which is ideas. And so in this case, how does the author use descriptive language to create atmosphere? Well, not a lot about ideas here. Instead, mostly about style, descriptive language creating atmosphere. And so we're going to focus on that. Now that we know that atmosphere is the feeling created because of the description of the setting and the environment, we can determine what it is. And maybe instead of coming up with that larger idea, we're going to just focus mostly on coming up with what kind of atmosphere is created and how is it created. So what kinds of things could you trace? Well, how about all the colors? I noticed after reading it a couple of times, there was a lot of white mentioned and some blue. Maybe I would trace that and see if that leads to something interesting. Maybe I would trace, I love oppositional pairs, things that seem to work in contrasting ways. How about looking at the old rock, the rock that's described as ancient, versus the new growth that's kind of, growing in cracks of that old rock. Maybe you could trace aspects of weather. Here's another oppositional pair, sea versus land. How about the elements? At one point, he talks about the elementals. Trace all of the different elements, air, sea, rock, earth, plants. Dead or ancient things, I noticed there's a lot of those referenced as well. So those are some ideas. Now, when you start color marking, you're just going to look for something like this. And then as you go, you're going to decide what kind of significance it creates, right? What kind of pattern you have. And then at the end, you'll make some claims, a debatable claim and a non-debatable claim that will attach some meaning to it. Let me show you what I mean. The sample paper that is in 6.4 is the other one by J.S., our superstar graduate from 2021. And what she traced when she color marked this extract was seclusion, low temperature, and growth of plants and branches. And after tracing that, she came up with some non-debatable and interpretive claims that she uses in her first paragraph or intro paragraph and her thesis statement, which I have added here. They are also in Schoology in her essay. So she says, in this extract, Durrell, and let me just show you the patterns too. Durrell is able to create an atmosphere of isolation and loneliness through the use of the details given involving seclusion. So she started by looking for details that she saw as seclusion. And then she determined that they created an atmosphere of isolation and loneliness. Furthermore, the atmosphere is illustrated due to the descriptive language of the low temperature. So after tracing the low temperature, she decides a barren atmosphere is created with those details, with that descriptive language. And then this last one, she says, however, Durrell's hints of plant life and specific descriptive language on the growth of plants and branches combat the negative connotation of the barren and lonely atmosphere already created. So this one works in contrast to the others, and I had kind of noticed that myself too here in this one. She's coming at it a different way, and she says in this last sentence that the growth of plants and branches is contrasting the barren and what was the other atmosphere she said? Isolated and lonely atmosphere. Okay, so this is where you're headed. Give it a shot. Feel free to trace what she traced, any of these. Your job is to trace 3 patterns and then to make some claims about their effects and the connection to meaning. And think specifically about that guiding question as you do so. Good luck to you. Let me know what you need from me.